My daughter-in-law passed me her phone under the Thanksgiving tablecloth while my son was refilling everyone's wine glass. One line, no punctuation. Just, Dad, check your brokerage account right now and don't react. I looked up at her across the table. Audrey didn't blink. She gave the smallest nod and turned back to her cranberry sauce like nothing had happened. My son Victor was laughing about something. Football, maybe. He had that big, easy laugh he'd had since he was a teenager, the kind that fills a room and makes everyone relax. I used to love that laugh. I used to think it meant he was happy, that I'd done something right. I excused myself to use the bathroom. I sat on the closed toilet lid in the upstairs hall bathroom, the one with the little seashell soaps Eleanor used to buy at craft fairs, and I opened the Fidelity app on my phone with hands that weren't quite steady. I told myself it was going to be fine. Maybe Audrey had spotted some market dip and wanted me to rebalance. Maybe this was about something minor. Maybe I was about to feel embarrassed for panicking over nothing. The account summary loaded. The number I saw was not the number that was supposed to be there. I had $847,000 in that account 8 months ago. I remember because my financial advisor Curtis had called to congratulate me on crossing the threshold, and I'd written the date in the small notebook I keep by the kitchen phone, March 14th. I wrote it down because Eleanor would have been proud. The balance on the screen said $204,000. I sat in that bathroom for 4 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on my phone. 4 minutes of staring at that number, trying to make it make sense, trying to find the error, the glitch, the innocent explanation. There wasn't one. I flushed the toilet I hadn't used. I washed my hands. I looked at myself in the mirror above the seashell soaps and I made myself a promise. Don't make a scene. Not today. Not yet. I walked back downstairs and I sat at my own Thanksgiving table, and I watched my son Victor pour himself a third glass of Merlot, and I did not say one word. Let me back up. My name is Bernard. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as an environmental engineer for the county, retired 4 years ago, and I live in the same house in Ashland, Oregon that Eleanor and I bought in 1989. Eleanor passed 2.5 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. The kind of timeline that doesn't leave you any room to prepare, even when you think you're preparing. Victor is our only child. He's 41 now. Growing up, he was the kid who built things. Elaborate marble runs, model bridges, elaborate plans for businesses he was going to start someday. I used to joke with Eleanor that we'd raised an entrepreneur. She'd say we'd raised a dreamer, and she meant it affectionately. We were proud of him. We were always proud of him. He married Audrey 14 years ago. She was a nurse practitioner when they met, sharp and no-nonsense, the kind of woman who remembers every detail of every conversation. I'll be honest. It took me a couple of years to warm up to her. She didn't coddle anyone and she didn't pretend. Eleanor saw her clearly from the beginning. She's exactly what Victor needs, Eleanor told me once. She's the anchor. I didn't fully understand that until Thanksgiving. 8 months before that dinner, about 6 weeks after Eleanor's death anniversary in February, Victor had come to see me alone. He said he was worried about me. Said I seemed isolated, that I wasn't taking care of the house the way I used to, that maybe it would be good to think about making some practical plans for the future. He was gentle about it. He made coffee and he sat at the kitchen table, and he talked to me like a son who was genuinely concerned. He brought up power of attorney. He said it wasn't morbid, it was just smart planning. He said Audrey's father had passed without any arrangements in place, and it had been a nightmare for the family. He said he just wanted to make sure that if something happened to me, if I had a health scare, if I got confused about anything, there would be someone legally authorized to step in and help. He said it would give him peace of mind. I was 66 years old, healthy, still driving myself to the farmer's market every Saturday morning. But I had watched Eleanor lose everything in 11 weeks, and the fear of being incapacitated, of being a burden, of leaving a mess for people I loved. That fear was real. Victor knew it was real. He had watched me live with it for 2 years. I said I'd think about it. He came back 3 weeks later with documents a notary was ready to witness. He said the attorney had already reviewed everything, and it was straightforward. I asked if I should have my own attorney look at it first. He said, of course, absolutely, that was the smart thing to do. And then he mentioned, almost in passing, that the attorney's fee would be another few $100s, and wasn't it a little redundant since the document was standard boilerplate? I signed. That was my mistake. That was the thread, and I pulled it without knowing what was attached to the other end. For the first few months I didn't notice anything. My brokerage account isn't something I check obsessively. I have a financial advisor and I trusted the system. I was busy with grief, with the ordinary loneliness of a house that used to have 2 people in it. I was learning to cook for one. I was donating Eleanor's clothes to the women's shelter on Pine Street, 1 bag at a time, the way the grief counselor suggested. I didn't notice because I wasn't looking. Victor had access to my brokerage under the POA. He had access to my checking account too. The transfers were structured to look like investment moves. Money shifted between accounts, not withdrawn in obvious lump sums. He was methodical about it. I'll give him that, though it's the only thing I'll give him. Audrey figured it out in September. She told me the whole story that evening after Thanksgiving dinner, after Victor had gone to pick up his cousin from the airport and we were alone in the kitchen washing dishes. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. She said she'd found a receipt in September, a property tax bill forwarded to their address, for a house in Bend she didn't know they owned. She went looking. She found the deed, registered in a holding company with Victor's initials in the LLC name. She found the purchase price. She found where the down payment came from. She found 4 other transfers after that, smaller ones, moving through different accounts. She had spent 6 weeks documenting everything before she said a word to me. She'd gone to a financial crimes attorney in Medford on her lunch break. She had a folder. She slid it across the kitchen counter to me while the dishwater was still running. "I'm sorry, Bernard," she said. "I'm so sorry it took since this long. I needed to be sure. I needed everything in order before I came to you. I stood at that sink for a long time. The water got cold. I didn't notice. I want to be careful about how I describe what I felt in that kitchen, because I've thought about it many times since, and I still don't have clean language for it. Betrayal is too small a word. Grief was already living in that house. Eleanor's absence was in every room, in the seashell soaps and the empty side of the closet, and the coffee mug I still couldn't put in the back of the cabinet. And now this. Now Victor. I thought about the marble runs he built as a kid. I thought about driving him to soccer practice at 6 in the morning without complaint, for 9 years. I thought about the look on his face at our kitchen table when he brought those POA documents. The practice concern, the rehearsed gentleness. I thought about how good he was at that look. I thought about Eleanor saying she's the anchor, and Eleanor had been right, just not in the way either of us expected. I asked Audrey what she wanted to do. She said, "Whatever you decide, I'll support it. But I'm not going to pretend I didn't see what I saw. And I'm not going to stay quiet while he does this to you." I told her I needed a few days. She gave me 2 weeks. She called every evening, not to push, just to check in. She asked about my day. She asked if I'd eaten. She was doing what Victor had pretended to do, looking after me without wanting anything from me. I called Curtis, my financial advisor, and told him I suspected unauthorized access to my account, and I needed a full transaction history, and I needed him to quietly remove Victor's authorization while I figured things out. Curtis didn't ask a lot of questions. He'd been in finance long enough to recognize the shape of the situation. He said he'd have the records pulled by end of day. The transaction history was 63 pages. Victor had moved $643,000 out of my brokerage account across 18 months. Not all at once. Slowly, in patterns that mimicked normal portfolio rebalancing. If you didn't know what you were looking for, if you weren't a financial crimes attorney reviewing it line by line, it looked like ordinary investment activity. It was very well executed, and I don't say that with any admiration. I say it because I want you to understand that this wasn't impulsive. This was planned. This was something Victor had worked out carefully, probably before he ever sat down at my kitchen table with that cup of coffee and that concerned look on his face. I went to see my own attorney, a woman named Patricia Holloway who had done our wills when Eleanor was first diagnosed. She reviewed everything Audrey had compiled, the transaction history from Curtis, the property records, the LLC documents. She said the criminal exposure was significant. She said the civil recovery options were strong. She asked me how I wanted to proceed. I said I wanted it done right. I said I didn't want Victor to have any warning. I said I wanted to make sure everything was so thoroughly documented that there was no room for him to claim confusion or accident or misunderstanding. Patricia said, "Give me 6 weeks." Those 6 weeks were the hardest thing I've done since Eleanor's last 11. I saw Victor 3 times during that period. He called regularly. He brought me firewood once, stacked it himself in the side yard, and stayed for dinner. I made chili from Eleanor's recipe and we watched a football game together, and I sat on my own couch and I looked at my own son and I said nothing. I don't know if I was protecting the case or protecting myself from what came next. Maybe both. Maybe I needed those 6 weeks to fully accept what I already knew. Patricia called on a Tuesday afternoon in January. She said everything was in order. She said the Jackson County Sheriff's Office Financial Crimes Unit had been briefed and was prepared to move. She asked if I was ready. I said yes. I called Victor that evening. I told him I'd been going through some of Eleanor's things and found some old financial documents she'd wanted me to sort through, and I could use a second set of eyes. I told him to come Saturday morning. He came at 10 o'clock with a coffee from Dutch Bros, the way he used to when he was visiting his mother in her last months. He set it on the kitchen counter and smiled at me and said, "What do you need, Dad?" Two detectives from the Financial Crimes Unit were already inside. They'd come in through the back with Patricia. They were sitting in the living room when Victor walked through from the kitchen. I watched his face in the moment he understood what he was looking at. I will carry that moment with me for the rest of my life. Not with satisfaction, not exactly, but with something I don't have a word for. Recognition, maybe. The instant when the performance dropped and I finally saw the real thing underneath it. The detectives identified themselves. They read him his rights in my living room, next to the bookshelf where Eleanor's reading glasses are still sitting on the second shelf because I can't bring myself to move them. Victor looked at me. He said, "Dad, come on, Dad." I said nothing. They took him out through the front door. I stood at the window and watched the patrol car pull out of my driveway, and I stood there for a while after it was gone. Patricia handled the legal proceedings methodically, the way she handles everything. Victor was charged with elder financial abuse, theft by deception, and misuse of power of attorney. A felony in Oregon when the amount exceeds $10,000. The amount in this case exceeded $643,000. His attorney tried to negotiate. Patricia let him try. Victor eventually entered a guilty plea to avoid a trial. The sentencing was in April. I sat in the third row with Audrey, who had filed for divorce the week after Thanksgiving. The judge sentenced Victor to 5 years with the possibility of parole after 22 months. He was ordered to pay full restitution, $643,000, plus the costs of the civil litigation I'd filed separately to recover the Ben property and the other assets he'd transferred. Victor did not look at me during the sentencing. I don't know if that was his attorney's instruction or his own decision. It doesn't matter much to me either way. The Ben property sold in June. The recovery process is ongoing. Patricia says it may take another 18 months to work through all of it. I've gotten back roughly $380,000 so far. I don't know if I'll recover all of it. I've made peace with the possibility that I might not. What I have recovered fully is my account access, my financial autonomy, the knowledge that no one has a legal claim to my assets that I didn't deliberately and knowingly give them. I revoked all the POA documents immediately. I worked with Patricia to set up a more careful estate plan, one with multiple safeguards, multiple trustees, nothing contingent on one person's goodwill. I also called Curtis and asked him to put a monitoring alert on any account in my name. He set it up the same afternoon. He said he should have suggested it years ago. There are things I think about late at night when the house is quiet in the way it's been quiet since Eleanor left. I think about when the shift happened in Victor, whether it was gradual or whether it was always there, underneath, waiting. I think about whether I missed signs I should have caught. I think about the marble runs and the early soccer practices and whether I was building a picture of a son that was more about what I wanted to see than what was actually there. I don't have answers to those questions. I don't think I'm going to get them. What I know is this: Audrey didn't have to do what she did. She could have looked away from that property tax bill. She could have told herself it wasn't her problem, that her marriage was complicated enough without this. She could have stayed quiet and let it continue. She would have benefited from it eventually, one way or another. She didn't. She spent 6 weeks building a case in secret, on her lunch breaks, driving to a city she'd never heard of, paying an attorney out of her own checking account because she didn't want to use their joint funds. She did all of that because she thought it was the right thing and she thought I deserved to know. I told her that one afternoon this past spring, sitting on my back porch with the Rogue Valley spread out below us and the pear trees starting to blossom the way they do every April. I told her I didn't know how to thank her. She said, "Eleanor would have done the same thing. You know that. I do know that." Eleanor saw clearly and she told the truth and she didn't look away from hard things. It's what I loved most about her. It turns out I married into it too. I just didn't know it for a long time. Victor's first parole hearing is scheduled for February of next year. I've been asked if I want to submit a statement. I'm still deciding. There are things I would want to say and things I don't trust myself to say cleanly, and I'm not going to stand in front of a parole board and be less than clear. I have time to figure it out. In the meantime, I go to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings. I make Eleanor's chili when the weather turns cold. I stack my own firewood now. The neighbor's teenage son helps me for $20, and the honest transaction feels like something I didn't know I was missing. I leave Eleanor's reading glasses on the second shelf. Some things I'm not ready to change. Some things I'm not sure I ever will be. And that's okay. That's mine to decide.